And I'm watching the stream. You Will Remember Who You Were by Cat Sparks. Amaryllis Storm Petrel, performance poet, essayist, and famed orator of classical fantastica, had barely stepped upon the stage when terrorists hit Solstice Ark with a data bomb. Barely whispered the opening to the inspiration of botanical forms on 20th century lithography when screaming drowned out everything, and shiny auditorium surfaces bloomed with liquid graffiti montage. A maelstrom of harried images and sounds, ugly footage of war, deprivation successfully penetrating the barrier fields. Solstice Arc security took several minutes to sanitize and flush offending contaminants. Handheld, implanted, and wearable devices were proving trickier to purge than walls and surfaces. Data shrapnel, although crude, could be exceptionally sticky. Zoo animals were the only exhibits to survive digital assault, with their impervious surfaces of follicle, hide, and fur. The Siberian tiger, proboscis monkey, African elephant, brother lions, proud horned buffalo, Tibetan mastiff, and one slightly moth eaten zebra watched over proceedings with glassy eyed indifference. Not even the auditorium's magnificent rose window had been spared the gross indignity. Amaryllis screamed upon the days beneath its pastel splendor, makeup streaming down her face, her elegant recitation trampled beneath the soles of 1,000 panicked feet. Within hours, no one would remember the intricacies of her hand stitched gown, incremental gradations of progressive blush, blonde dreadlocks, and embedded with ceramic and heat set resin protuberances. Welcome! I didn't see you coming. Welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and as you know, I'm reading on a tight schedule here with this weekly book club. So this was an excerpt from Cat Sparks' new release or current release, Dark Harvest. And to my shame, I have to admit, I'm I'm running late. I'm running late reading it, but we do have Kat here today. We have two amazing guests. We have two amazing guests from Australia, Kat Sparks and James Bradley. And this is, of course, a different time, and we will introduce them in just a minute. This is a time that is ungodly for some of us, and as I often say, virtual worlds have brought us closer together. Time zones are still keeping us apart. So, Kat Sparks with a new collection, Dark Harvest. James Bradley with his current book, Ghost Species. We will talk about climate fiction. We will talk about real stuff. We will talk about nonfiction versus fiction. Is there uh, something that activates us more, something that keeps us more docile? A few housekeeping notes. First, Book Club Island, as you know, is open 24/7. There's lots of newbies here, so please be nice to them, be patient, be kind. The normal time is Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time. We also have other monthly shows. As a matter of fact, the Mystery Hour with Con Sweeney is coming up on Monday at 6 p.m. We stream everywhere: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We have about 3,000 people viewing it collectively on all these streaming platforms. It's absolutely insane. Makes me very happy as a reader. People at least watch other people talk about books. Maybe they even read. Who knows? We love lapsed reader here at the book club. Don't be shy if you haven't read anything for years, or uh, back in high school you may have read your last book. We welcome you here. We're booked until November 21, 2021, but you can always suggest an author. slbookclub@draxter.com. There's a reading list we put out. You just click on the books or on the panel behind me, and it shoots you straight to the bookshop.org website. Now, let me introduce my guests. Kat Sparks is an author. Maybe she's also a multimedia artist. I need to know from her if she's comfortable with that classification. She's a great photographer, also editor, former publisher. Her debut novel, Lotus Blue, was recommended to me by Daisy Gator, a prominent SL resident. I interviewed Kat in Sansa in virtual reality with a headset before. Welcome, Kat. How are you doing?
Hi, Drax. Fantastic to be here. You're such a trooper, the hours you keep to include Australians on your program.
I'm not.
I don't consider myself a multimedia artist, but a graphic designer.
Aha, aha. So a graphic designer is there something wrong with the multimedia? I'm just asking. I'm not sure. Is that out of
No, no,
style?
no. It's just, I'm technologically inept, so I wouldn't want to be making claims in that direction. You
Listen
know,
to this. You had a headset on before we met in VR. You're capable of standing and sitting in Second Life. You were able to walk to the podium. I mean, admittedly, you fell off briefly, but you
and
recovered
I
and
may
flew
do it
back.
again. I may do a encore performance of that one. We'll see how we go.
And we also have now on the other side of the stage, on the other couch, we have James Bradley, prolific author of fiction and nonfiction, also several young adult books, which I have to dive into. I have not gotten a taste of those. Very excited about this. James Bradley writes many articles for Australian publications, also The Guardian. They have very, very life reassuring and optimistic titles such as The End of Oceans, Last Days of the Anthropocene. Really uplifting stuff. Welcome, James.
Uh, Thank you. It's great to be here. I feel like Marvin the Paranoid Android when you describe me like that.
Well, we'll get to know you. We'll see if I mean, this is actually something I do want to talk about in the hour. Is that sense of disaster fatigue, and a lot of people are I think rightly so, criticizing the obsession with or the preoccupation with COVID, which is normal, but that the whole climate crisis is sort of on the back burner. Like let's deal with COVID first, and then do the climate crisis, which of course is really not an option. And you're right about these things. And welcome, Kat, and welcome, James. And I completely forgot because of the hour. I completely forgot to thank my team. Isabel Sharon is running the show today. Also at a strange hour. The team also includes Strawberry Linden, Brett Linden, Patch Linden, the Moles, Marianne McCann customized the venue. Kralos made these wonderful avatars of James and Kat. Silas Merlin, who was in the audience, he makes very, very custom avatars sometimes. And lastly, big thanks to Sika Ghost, who has provided some props here, some big book stacks that you can see in the back, and also this looming librarian that sits behind us on this gigantic chair. Now, uh, I noticed when I was researching your work, Kat, on your homepage, you were interviewed on ABC Radio, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, on a show, and the question was, what makes Australian sci-fi unique? Of course, I didn't listen to this show because I want to ask you the question, and James as well. Now, what do you think makes Australian sci-fi unique?
Um, it's a question that comes up a lot, and I
Kat?
think,
Oh, yeah,
yes,
there
can
you
you
are.
hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, I find there are some motifs that get repeated a lot in Australian science fiction. I use them myself, and it's not that I set out to choose them particularly, but they present themselves. So islands, deserts, being strangers in your own land, isolation, these kinds of things come up a lot. And I think Australians feel separate in some ways, can feel very separate from um, parts of the world that have longer histories in terms of what we have been taught of as history.
Right.
So, of course, Australia has a very long history of habitation, but with Indigenous people, perhaps even stretching back 85,000 years. I'm really not sure, but we are colonial offspring, people like myself have this colonial background, and that affects the way we think.
Mhm. James, what would you say the uniqueness of Australian sci-fi? I mean, this makes total sense to me, Kat, especially because I'm familiar with your work. It's really in it in almost every story in every story in the
Yeah, I
subtext.
can't get away.
Yeah. Well, you're on an
Look,
island. Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was going to say, I mean, I think particularly with the kind of a lot of the contemporary writing that's going on in Australia, there is, as Kat said, a kind of awareness of, I guess, of the kind of legacies of colonialism. So you've got kind of really interesting work, I think, being done by certainly some Indigenous writers working in that space, people like Claire Coleman. But I think as you kind of, what you also see is people trying to engage with a series of questions around climate and environmental crisis and things like that. But simultaneously, I think recognizing that a lot of their roots lie in a lot of those questions about, colonialism, imperialism, dispossession, and in a sense, trying to grapple with that kind of deeper history and slightly alternative history of where those problems come from.
I wonder if you see when you read American sci-fi or speculative fiction, because I mean, I could say that that the America has a deep-seated problem with their relationship with the indigenous people of the Americas. Do you see that expressed in a similar way, or in a completely different way, or to a lesser extent? I mean, in your subjective reading when you read American works.
Um, well, I, I think it is probably expressed differently. I mean, I think again, one of the things that's really interesting at the moment in kind of American science fiction is the emergence of a whole range of essentially kind of indigenous writers of one kind or another. So there's been a string, in fact, of and I'm here going to have to confess I haven't read any of them yet. But I mean, just in the last few months, there's been a series of novels by people. The Last Good Indian by Stephen Jones. Sorry, I've forgotten his name. Would be one, but certainly there's been a number of novels trying to grapple, I think, with those questions, and in a sense, I guess, trying to bring that conversation into the kind of discourse of American science fiction. So, I mean, I think that's been really interesting. But I suspect it is different because the legacies of dispossession are different. I think in many ways they're much closer in Australia, because it's a much younger country. But I don't mean by that to diminish what they are in the
Yeah.
US. But I mean, I think they're much more present for Australians. They're kind of a central part of our discourse. Whereas I get the sense that in the States, perhaps those questions are not quite as front of mind all the time.
Well, I
Yeah, I
can,
would agree with that.
yeah, Kat.
And I think another thing to consider is in Australia, our natural landscape, everything in our natural landscape is trying to kill us all the time.
Mhm.
So I think whereas I think there's a sense of domination that permeates American literature broadly. I mean, it's a very broad statement, but Americans are used to running the world or thinking they do, and we're used to redbacks on our toilet seats and etc. So maybe that plays into it.
I'm looking forward to having some German sci-fi writers on the show, and asking them a similar question if they find some sort of national I don't know, unifying theme within their works. I mean, it is a broad question, but it's nonetheless uh, really interesting what drive what you know what drives those narratives, and especially when you try
Mm.
to see yourself, maybe you want to intentionally do something different as well, I guess, right? Or
I guess
or you guys just want to be like the Americans?
No,
no.
no, not at all.
Well, but I
We don't
mean, in fact, it's
have one.
I think distinguishing ourselves from the Americans is always one of the issues, isn't it, Kat?
Definitely, definitely. Our
Uh-huh.
cultures are so different. Like I couldn't believe how different. When the first time I went to America, I was expecting something pretty much like a home, and it was as foreign as the most foreign place you can think of. The whole attitudes were just different. There was some ingrained differences that I still can't quite get my head around. There's an entitlement there that I think we don't quite have in the same way.
Mm. Well, that undoubtedly comes from at least the readily available version of the history of America, how they did so well in other parts of the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
Um, I'm not going to get into a
Let's
recent
not go
Twitter
there. Let's not.
conversation. Yes, historical context matters, folks. I'm speaking with Kat Sparks and James Bradley today on the book club, and I'm monitoring the chat. Please also let me know if there's echoes, and I'm also monitoring the Facebook and the YouTube chat. Now, Kat has a new collection out. It's here on the table. You can zoom in and check it out. It's Dark Harvest, and Jean-Jacques Dupre, as he is known here in Second Life, a distant relative, James Bradley, who signed up around the time when I signed up to SL. That's why we share the same last name. This is absolutely awesome. Has a book out now that's called Ghost Species, and what we're going to get into both those books. Another question up front is a also one of classification of climate fiction and ecological fiction. I had Liz Jensen on a while back, a big fan of Liz Jensen, and she was introducing me to eco fiction, and she has a distinctive there's a difference between climate fiction and ecofiction. How do you guys feel about these kind of sort of subgenres of sci-fi? Does it make sense to have something like that? Do you feel comfortable if a reviewer would call you, oh, here's James, a proponent of climate fiction, or is it
I saw a
redundant?
review. I saw a review of myself recently, Drax, which described me as a climate polemicist.
Oh,
Which is not something I would have thought of myself as, I have to say. Look, Kat and I have talked about this before. My view is that most of these categories are useful as marketing categories. I think, however, that when you start talking about a lot of these questions around environmental crisis and climate and things like that, I think we need to think about it as it's not a genre. It's a tangible condition in the way that modernity is a tangible condition. It kind of touches everything. So, it's not that there are books that are climate books. It's that all fiction now is climate fiction in some way, whether it's talking about it or not, because it's kind of either engaged with or in some way obscuring what's going on.
Mhm.
And they're very useful. They're really useful in terms of helping people find their way to the books, in terms of promoting the books, in terms of doing all those things, but they're not generic classifications,
Right.
and it doesn't make sense to use them as them, in my view, but I think Kat has a slightly different view.
Look, it's not. I wouldn't completely disagree. In fact, I even quoted some of the things you just mentioned then in my PhD. So I did a PhD a couple of years ago on looking at the intersection between eco-catastrophe science fiction of the 60s and 70s and contemporary climate fiction. And I
Mm.
was trying to work out was climate fiction a new genre that had budded off from science fiction, or is it still part of science fiction? And my conclusion was that it has budded off into a separate genre of its own, which you can tell this because of different people read it and write it than the people who read and write science fiction. So there's crossover, but it has more scope, more appeal, more reach, more depth. But I think at the end of the day, exactly as James was saying, the classification is not the point. The point is the message. The point is climate change affects every single thing that happens to us. It is putting at risk life as we know it on this planet. And so what we need is for people to think about it and start getting active about doing something about it. Doesn't matter if it's science fiction, eco-fiction, climate fiction as a label. That is not important. The words in the books are important.
Eh, Along those lines, I mean, I can see that it's easier to, well, for marketing, of course, and then maybe stock the shelves, but that also comes with a maybe an expectation of the reader. And I want to know if you find that problematic, because I just finished Ghost Species of James's last book. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. It affected me deeply. I'll get into it a little bit later. And as I'm reading it, I'm so immersed in the story. It's about a young girl, and yeah, we'll talk about it some more. But the young girl grows up, and it's a relationship with her mother in a world that is destroyed, and the girl has her origin is very intriguing. But anyway, the as I'm reading this book, I know it is the backdrop is disaster, the world that we live in right now, and I was almost praying to James, say, please don't end this like Parable of the Sower or the Road or other books. Give me a little glimmer of hope. But I'm wondering if people, I mean, this is a multi-pronged question. So here's the expectation: some people may go to that genre and expecting complete destruction at the end. Almost like I don't know. Is this people have used the term disaster porn, I guess. There's also disaster fatigue. Do you feel beholden to some tropes here, up the ante, if you will, at the end, where complete destruction is sort of the payoff, if you will, with the story? Or how do you feel about those types of pressures when you write stuff?
James, do you want to talk first about
Um,
Ghost Species?
yeah, I mean, look, I have slightly mixed feelings about all of this. I mean, I worry about the way that a lot of fiction in this space gets instrumentalized. I worry that what we want it to do is to be, kind of activism in fiction. And I am not convinced that that's the only role for fiction that's kind of grappling with these questions. I mean, I think one of the things that it needs to be doing is representing what the textures of life are like now. One of the things it needs to be
Hmm.
doing is showing us kind of what it is like to live in this moment. And it's not just about kind of changing people's minds and making them do things, but simultaneously, I think that is one of the things it can do. I mean, it can kind of give us a set of fictional tools for thinking about, talking about, engaging with a lot of these questions, because climate change is incredibly difficult to think about. I mean, it's one of those things where it's so big, it's so overwhelming. We start to think about it and you just shut down. I mean, you can't get any purchase on the thing. It's too hard. It's too overwhelming. And it seems to me that fiction is one of the ways you can give people a kind of emotional engagement with it. And certainly when I was writing
Hmm.
Clade, the book that was before this, that was one of the things I wanted to do. I wanted to find a kind of effective framework so people could imagine what it was like, what it might be like to live through a kind of climate changed future. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wonder sometimes about that that kind of idea of a kind of relentless fiction, which is, yeah, I mean, there's something about the kind of emphasis upon disaster, the
Yeah.
emphasis upon ending, and acting like there's something.
And James, I'm sorry, I'm stepping on you here, but what I realize now as you're talking is my critique, I think, is more along the lines of films. I mean, I think in a visual context with a visual medium, this is way more problematic. The allure that the chaos and the destruction has, and it
Yeah.
kind of drowns out the solution, and you just sort of get out of the experience with like a certain catharsis, which leads absolutely nowhere. I mean, this is just my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I actually agree. I mean, I think that there is, look, I think two things. I think one of the things is we have to be realistic about where we are, and where we are is terrifying. We are hurtling into a future which is, well, we are already in a present which is completely unlike any past we've ever known. I mean, the world is, our society cannot continue in the form that it's in. I mean, there's huge changes ahead of us. But there is something about pretending that there is a virtue in saying, yeah, the world's going to end and we're all going to die. And I
Hmm.
don't think, pretending that there's a kind of intellectual clarity or an intellectual integrity about that seems to me to be wrong. I mean, for a couple of reasons. One is because basically, you're just being a bit of an asshole, really. Kind of pretending that you're the tough-minded one. I mean, I think there's a real level at which the same kinds of people end up being climate doomists as end up being climate denialists is about a particular kind of performance of hard-headedness.
Yeah.
But also because there seems to me to be something fundamentally, if you're a privileged Westerner, as I am, as I imagine many people in this room are, there is something fundamentally kind of racist about that position. Because what you're doing is you're saying, the culture I come from has trashed the world because most of this is coming from people like us. It's all too hard to fix. We'll probably be okay because, we're rich enough to kind of, put up the barricades and keep the place going. But all of those people out there in Bangladesh, all of those people in Burma, all of those people in Africa, well, sorry, you're done. I mean, there's that kind of, there's something about giving up like that, about pretending that there's somehow virtuous to give up, which just really gives me the horrors.
Right.
Absolutely. I could not, I second that in every possible way. A lot of what passes for science fiction in the West is filled with the living conditions of people in other cultures today. Like, it's the worst thing we can think of for our
Yep.
apocalypse is living like a poor person is in India, but the set's addressed differently. I think it's so easy to destroy the world. And I say that as someone who's written a lot of post-apocalypse fiction. I've always loved it. But Lotus Blue is set in that environment. Dark Harvest is full of many of those kinds of stories. But I'm making a concerted effort myself as a writer to start trying to move away from that and tell stories. Imagine more positive futures. And I don't mean utopias. I mean practical pathways to better conditions, moving away from the hero's journey template and to tell more stories about more collective efforts, perhaps. I'm finding it very difficult. The story I first experimented with is Hacking Santorini, which is in Dark Harvest, and that's set after a form of apocalypse, but it's putting a bit of joy back into how we will live together, or putting some comedy into it. I'm finding it very tough, but I am succeeding with my slow project. I think authors have a responsibility to stop wallowing in apocalypse porn and start helping with the process of mapping better futures. So I guess I'm talking about the solar punk movement in lots of ways. I don't like the term hope punk, but I like the idea behind it. I just think we need better branding on that one. But it is just too easy to be too negative all the time and just give up. And as James says, we aren't going to be the people, we already haven't been the people suffering through the worst of climate change. And we're going to be the ones who at least have houses and food and stuff like that. So our art needs to, perhaps it'd be good to direct our art towards the bigger picture.
Really great point. Let me throw in here what Jules says. Jules says in the chat, I once read that being Latina is basically having survived your own apocalypse. I mean, we literally survived our own genocide, present day genocide even. Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Oh, well, and Jules, Aboriginal people in Australia would say the same thing. I mean, they would say, you're all worried about the end of the world. The end of the world for us came 200 years ago, and we survived it. So I mean, it's that sense that this history is a deep history. It's not something that's just happened recently. But what I was going to say is, one of the things that seems to me is that if what you want to do is insist that we're at a moment of kind of historical rupture, is that you move what's happening out of history. And the problem is, whatever happens in the next 20 years, the next 50 years, the next 100 years, we will still inhabit history. And by insisting on that sense of continuity between the past and the future, even if the future is very different from where we are now, it requires us to think about the origins of it. So that kind of insisting that we remain within history requires us to continue thinking about where the history comes from. What are the structures at work? What are the forces at work? And the forces at work with climate are, kind of colonialism, capitalism, imperialism. I mean, it's all of those kind of things that have driven this process, the kind of racialized logic of capitalism, and by insisting, by somehow insisting that this is a kind of rupture, that history is over, that it's all going to fall apart. What we do is we allow ourselves to escape from a consideration of those factors.
Yeah.
And that, as Kat says, moves us away from thinking that this is actually about justice. It's actually about, climate action is climate justice. It's about trying to adjust the disparities between rich and poor. It's about trying to, get the world to a place where, we actually all have a stake in its future.
Can I just add one
really
more?
well put. Yeah, please go ahead,
Add
Kat.
one more thing to that. I'd like to just throw this into the mix. We talk about. I said before, life as we know it on this planet is in peril at the moment, but it's actually worse than that. It's worse than that because, as far as we know, we are the only planet with life in the universe, and we are certainly the only planet with complex life, intelligent life, etc., and things that took billions of years to achieve. And that's what's at stake here. It's all the life there is. And you can argue that surely there must be many other civilizations out there, but we don't know this. We are literally playing dice with everything. And that's such a big crime, there's not even a word for it.
If you're just tuning in and you are in a good mood, be prepared to get completely depressed. No. My guests are Kat Sparks and James Bradley, and we are broadcasting at an unusual hour. Kat has a new collection out, Dark Harvest, and they're all here on the table. By the way, if you're watching in World, you can zoom in and click on them. And James's last book is Ghost Species. And Kat, because you mentioned Hacking Santorini, I'm throwing this up as a slide on the big screen behind me. What I really love about your short story collections is you have these little blurbs of your own inspiration, where your inspiration came from those stories, and they're after the story. So, for example, here, the Santorini story is really hilarious, and it's a strange world building. I mean, it's your style. You throw people in there. I love that style. And then at the end, you have this little blurb that explains where the inspiration came from. In this case, you're right. A couple of years ago, friends invited us to stay with them in a holiday home on Santorini, Greek islands. I've never been anywhere that seems so overwhelmingly like a living postcard. Slick locals work very hard to extract summer revenue whilst maintaining the quality of the surrounds. The volcanic cliff tops are completely infested with bridal parties, and in the story, there's a hilarious that's a hilarious aspect. My friend revealed she had once spotted 27 brides in a single day, and I reckon if I had peered far enough over the rim, I'd have discovered a pile of them on the rocks below, broken brides who had fallen off their shoes. So there is I can actually detect what you said, Kat, because I'm familiar with your work when I first interviewed you, and there is at least in the mix of this Dark Harvest collection, there's a lot of humor in there, and it's refreshing. And then of course, then you're laughing, and then you, Kat, hit us with something really dark right after that. Is that
Yep.
your strategy?
Yeah. Well, that's my brain. That's just how it all works, because you've got to try and stay positive. I mean, I live in the most beautiful suburb in a well-resourced city in a reasonably good country. The sun shining and all of these lovely things. I'm surrounded by beautiful birds. I've become a bird fanatic, photographing birds all the time. I'm so lucky. I'm so privileged. And yet the world is going to hell in a handbasket. So, the strange balance there seeps through and infects my work. And I don't control my work. It writes me. I think that's pretty much how it goes.
I'm throwing up another one here. This is one a story that reappeared. The ship sail and the ship sails on, I think is the correct title. Vaguely inspired by the half-remembered Fellini film from which I pinched the title, this story is about the futility of attempts to preserve a decaying, corrupt, and necrotic society in the face of fresh new cultures coming through. Oh, is that a right one? What's the ship sails on? Can you, because this is one of the the stories that when I get into random conversations with book fans, I say you got to check out Cat Sparks, and that story the ship sails on is, this is so cool because what is the ship sails on about? Because this is so timely, I think. I mean, such a
Well, it
perfect
is about
metaphor.
it's about what I guess our culture that will just rot itself to death by trying to preserve all the things James was talking about a minute ago. Like if we don't check our history, we'll just. This is a bunch of people on a cruise ship, the rich people on the cruise ship who are clinging to their hierarchies and all of that while sailing around the dead world, while meanwhile the underclasses, the people who serve them, are, well, they've got their own stuff going on, but they're bursting out of their boundaries, and then you've got new life forms striking to come through as well. So the
But the
world will
world is but the world is dead, and they can't even
dead.
dock anywhere, right? Because they're
No, they
basically
can't. No.
they're totally trapped on this cruise ship. I mean, like, try to
Well,
picture this, guys. It's so cool.
it's
I mean,
another
it's not
version.
cool. Yeah.
It's another version of the bunker people. The bunker people
Yes.
amaze me. These are
Yes.
the super rich people around the world now who are buying up blocks of land
Yes.
in safer places like New Zealand and Tasmania, and they want to build underground bunkers so they can ride out the apocalypse with their families. And they're worried about how they're going to get other people to staff their apocalypse bunkers, because you can work that one out for yourself. And it's like, it's so ridiculous. Like, why would you? What are you going to come out in 10 years into a broken world? You're not winning anything like this. All
Yeah.
of their resources could be put into, fighting climate change, fighting for the future. And this idea that you could survive on a dead planet is ridiculous. So the ship story is another version of that. I'm fascinated by bunkers. I write about them a lot.
Jules said that sounds nightmarish. I hate cruises. Exactly. It sounds
Yeah,
it sounds yeah, it
it's
already
pretty.
sounds nightmarish, but in your story, I mean, they're literally like you said, I mean, they're like the bunker people, but they're on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
And what occurs to me, you said they're not winning, but I think in their minds, the bunker people, they're winning because in their minds, they're winning because the others are losing. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
that's kind of
communism
history.
versus capitalism. It's always like, oh, capitalism isn't so bad because, we won
Because
against
communism, yeah,
communism.
yeah, I know. And that's an argument that comes up all the time. It's like, are there only two ways of running countries?
Yeah.
Hypercapitalism or state fascism or communism or whatever? No, there are many
Yeah.
other types. Let's have a go, folks. Let's try. And the one that really gets me is, it's too expensive to fix capitalism, so we're all just going to have to die. It's like, I
Yeah.
can't even.
James, are we okay? Are we allowed to not reveal the premise of your book, Ghost Species? I actually checked in the back of the book. It says who Eve is,
Yeah,
because
yeah, no,
I find it brilliant, because this is another brilliant um, metaphor maybe for our relationship with the world, the relationship of Eve with her non-biological mother. What's happening in this book? Many species are extinct, and they're being revived by a Mark Zuckerberg type character.
that's right. That's right. Just very quickly, I wanted to say there's a book about a book published it's just being published right now by a guy called Bradley Garrett, who's a friend of mine, called Bunker, which is about bunkers. It's about talking about these things, writing about them, and terrific book. Bradley's an amazing guy. And used to do a lot of urban adventuring. So if any of you have read Rob McFarlane's book Underland, there's a series of chapters in that where he goes kind of down under London with a guy, and the guy is Bradley's. But Bunker's very, very worth reading. So I mean, I agree with Kat. The thing that's awful about all of that kind of prepping and bunker building is that basically they're betting against the rest of us. I mean, it is a horrible mindset. It's one that's saying, actually, as I saw someone say recently, it's a vision of what's going to happen to society, which could only be held by someone who never really believed in society in the first place.
Yep.
But to go back to where I was, so Ghost Species, the conceit is that the world's in a kind of place of kind of hastening kind of climate catastrophe. And there is this kind of Mark Zuckerberg character. He's a kind of cross between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg called Davis Hucken. And he has this idea that he can re-engineer the Earth's climate. And one of the ways he wants to do that is by bringing back extinct species from the Ice Age and by recreating kind of Ice Age landscapes, which is a kind of real scheme. I mean, there's people who are talking about that kind of geoengineering, that there's a project up in Siberia, as it turns out, where they're trying to recreate the mammoth to stop, which is almost exactly what's happening in the book, to prevent the melting of the permafrost. The thing that's very funny is that I actually kind of came up with the idea and then discovered that people were really doing it. But
Yeah,
within that...
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was almost going to say, because I looked up on Wikipedia Neanderthal, and there is DNA available.
Oh,
So,
yeah. I mean, look, I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, and they just pulled a cave bear out of the permafrost last week, like a fully
okay, so
intact
why
cave bear.
did I just mention Neanderthal? Sorry, I'm stepping on you here, James,
Oh,
because I'm so excited. So
No, no.
what's happening in the book?
Well, and so the idea is that basically they have this scheme to bring back extinct species. Within that, he's got another scheme which he wants to recreate Neanderthals, and he wants to do that for a range of reasons. And so the book is about the first of these children and about her being created and then kind of growing up as the world unravels around them. And I guess I came to it because I was looking for a way, I think, to write about a number of things, but one of them was that sense of the kind of derangement of temporality, which is one of the things that I think climate change does, which is that kind of sense that past and future and deep time all get mixed up. So we have all of these things that should be happening in geological time, kind of the melting of ice caps, the movement of shorelines, all of that kind of thing as waters rise. But they're not happening over tens of thousands of years. They're happening over human lifespans. So we have this kind of sense that deep time, geological time, is kind of bleeding into human time. And it seemed to me that this idea of these extinct species coming back, of things from the deep past being alive again, was a great way of thinking about that, but also of thinking about a whole series of questions around extinction and loneliness and that kind of sense of a
The
world
loneliness,
where
and
things are
yeah,
disappearing.
right, and Eve, the girl at the center of the story. I mean, she comes to life from DNA samples that they found in a cave from hundreds of thousands of years ago, and she grows up, and she of course looks different. Um, I mean, she is a Neanderthal, a different species from our species, and she gets bullied, she gets looked at weirdly in social context. And I gotta tell you, James, I mean, it's like, when you read this as a parent, I mean, it's absorbing, just sort of on the level of, like, you want to kind of protect your child in these um instances. And I could even see myself in that. I mean, I was, bullied for a little while. I don't want to over exaggerate. I mean, compared with what other friends of mine went through, it was fairly mild, but you can relate to that. And it also shows in your book sort of the self-destructive nature, I guess, of mankind, right? They're resurrecting this other species here, and then she gets into into sort of destructive situations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely. And I mean, that kind of sense of, I guess, of the vulnerability of that child was something that I was really, really interested in, because I mean, it seems to me that one of the things that's really fascinating about, speaking with my kind of critic hat on, one of the things I find really fascinating about a lot of the fiction in this space is that it's so often about relationships between parents and children. It's so often about missing children or missing parents. It's about breakdowns in those kinds of relationships. And I think that's because those relationships give us a way of thinking about our relationship to the past and future. So, our relationship with our children is not just a kind of personal relationship. It's actually a kind of relationship with a kind of continuance, a kind of human continuity. And when those things start to break and start to rupture, that continuity starts to break down. And I think that's something that, we can kind of feel those continuities breaking down around us at the moment in really profound
And
ways. But I think also one of the things, I mean, this particularly was a book that was, I've got kids who are kind of the age of the characters in these books, so you're kind of writing it, looking at your own kids and thinking about them. But also, I started writing this book kind of right as my dad died. My mum died just as I finished it, so there was this it's kind of a sense of that time in your life when you feel, you can kind of feel
the closing, that the door
yeah,
can
the kind
close.
of and that kind of sense of personal extinction is there beside you as well. So I mean, it seems to me that when we were talking before about how difficult it is to get your head around questions of climate crisis and climate catastrophe, it does seem to me that often these kind of human personal relationships offer us really powerful metaphors for thinking about those larger disruptions, which is not to say, I don't mean by that you don't want to engage in a kind of pathetic fallacy where, your own crisis stands in for the kind of larger crisis, but they do give us, I
Well,
think,
but it's a
ways of
little bit like, I
motion.
mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because the mother in the book is also has a super difficult relationship with her mother, who has alcohol problems, and she feels like maybe I'm unfit for parenting. And I mean, I don't want to overanalyze it, but it's also, I mean, it's the relationship that we have with the world, I guess.
Yeah,
We as human
absolutely.
beings inhabiting the world. I mean, how do we treat the world, and how does the world treat us back?
And how do we do that? I mean, the mother character, Kate, is, she has this terrible relationship with her own mother. The mother is an alcoholic, and there's a lot of stuff there that's kind of, my mother was not an alcoholic, but there's a lot of alcoholics in my family, and my grandmother was an alcoholic. And, so there's a lot of, I guess, kind of personal stuff in there. But I mean, it's also one of the things the book's trying to ask is how much of what is with us is inescapable. How
Yeah.
much do we end up just living what we've already been given? And there's a kind of moment in the book where Kate realizes that despite everything that she's tried, she, in a way, has kind of replicated her own childhood, the thing that she was
Replicating
desperate not
yeah.
to do.
That's
And it's
that's the biggest fear for every parent. I'm sorry, Kat. I feel like I'm neglecting you now, because it's all about like our own sort of trauma as we're living through it, feeling inadequate as parents. This is what I got. This is the only thing I got from James's book. And Cass is putting here in the chat, the best question raised by James' book are not, can we do this, but should we do this? Bringing back extinct species, that kind of thing. Absolutely. Um, I'm looking at the clock here. I'm always trying to squeeze so much into this hour, and sorry uh, to step on you here, James. I didn't want to completely interrupt you. You Let's turn it back to Kat here for a minute, because what I want to ask you in the context of James's book is, this is sort of near future stuff, I guess, is the term, right? And you go to near future um, settings, but you also go to very, very far away future settings. And I remember vaguely that I asked you this when I first interviewed you, because it fascinates me. Do you what is there is the far future setting, like in Lotus Blue, where you create this world? I don't know how far in the future it is now, but is there something better, more convenient to transport certain themes or ideas with the far future setting vis-a-vis the near future setting? I mean, for you, or is that a personal preference?
Yeah, Lotus Blue is set approximately 500 years in the future, and that number may or may not make sense in terms of the technology they've ended up with. But it's I
You
wrote.
get a lot of hate mails from hard sci-fi fans who say, well, actually, 200 years in the future, Mrs. Sparks, it does not make sense that they would still have
Yeah,
ice cream in a cone.
exactly. I have not had much terrible flack from that, but I think probably the number is a little bit pulled out of the air, but it doesn't matter. Look, it is a good way of isolating your story from the things, separating it from the familiar. I do write a lot of near future stuff as well, but I really wanted to write a classic post-apocalypse, like, because I love them so much. But the main message of the book is that I guess that we didn't. I mean, it turned into a climate story. It wasn't meant to be one, but everything, the PhD bled into it. And, I can't even write a shopping list without referencing climate change now. So, it's just, it took over everything. But the general point of it is that, you don't need an evil overlord to have the end of the world. You just need to not be paying attention. And that's the thing. It's like in Lotus Blue, one of the old war generals, the AI generals, gets discovered, and so everyone's rushing to see what they can do with it. Like, this is a great asset, something they can make use of, and they're just going to set the whole apocalypse off again by not knowing what they're doing. And so I guess that's the underlying idea there, is we need to be paying attention to our world situation, because that's when you lose control. When you make small, stupid decisions, can have terrible consequences.
Jules says in the comments, we need to be less stupid. Sela says in the comments, maybe Kat should publish her grocery list.
Grocery list.
I think we should we do a little bit of reading. I think we may have a prepared reading.
I would love to do a little
Kat,
reading.
would you love to do it? Yes.
I would.
I'm going to change the book out here, so take your time going up to the podium. This is the highlight of the book club, when people fall off the stage.
Oh, yes, and I will not disappoint, I'm sure.
We practiced it many times so that you do indeed pretend to fall off in a Buster Keaton type.
It'd be all right if I landed in a funny way, but All right, I'm getting up.
So here we go, and this is Dark Harvest, which is out now. And Kat's other books are here on the table. The Bride Price I don't have on the table. I'm going to put it up. This is great, Kat. Stand right there and look. This is the magic of Second Life. I will now arrange.
I think that's as good as it's going to get. So
yeah, no, this is good. Right. Here we go. What do we hear?
I would like to read the first few pages of Hacking Santorini, because I think it might cheer people up a little bit.
Very good.
I collect dirty postcards, the dirtier the better. The faded ones with folds and creases, coffee stains and greasy donut smears. My cards have seen a lot of love and can fetch a pretty poem. Pennies and other fiscal residue make great exchange for embroidered lace, cupcakes and mechanical know-how. Sometimes know-how is handier than poetry. I know how to sail the boat my grammar crashed into Heraklion not too long after the 88-minute war. Crash-landed and stranded as things turned out. Not so bad a place to wind up as many. Not that I've ever been anywhere else, but I've read much of other places, scrawled on postcards sent from Pasadena, Macau and Istanbul. Postcards salvaged from around the globe before the exclusion zones started excluding, and Heraklion got roughed up and heritage listed. You name it, reckon I got a card. Evidence exotic places once existed. Best of all are the cards from Santorini, the ones with beautiful blue domes. 65 nautical miles afar, says Grammar's stash of rolled and folded maps. Only Santorini's own heritage listing means nobody has been near it in living memory. Except for that's a dirty lie. My Grammar's boat tossed upon its waves, close enough to see the gleaming whitewash. But she couldn't land, so she took the name of the island for her boat, and I see no point in changing that boat's name now. Santorini speaks to excellence and names the things that get you noticed. Stories, too, when you've got to make the best of 7th or 8th hand artifacts and promises. For instance, Maurice's brass hound doghead mounted coat hook. Not much use for coats in these surrounds. Or Genevieve's darling 1940s folk art ice skates, brush-painted with a centre medallion windmill. And Guadalupe's unforgettable chicken ranch bar spinner brass necklace bottle opener. Spin to see who pays for all the drinks. Says she'd trade it for a chicken if such things still existed. I could go on, but a phalanx of Byron's Plaths and Allende's fast approaches. Fancy folks are my bread and ouzo, aside from cartes postales, of course. Postcards always come foremost and first. Folks share them when they want to hire my boat, and why shouldn't they, being that there's not much else to do on Heraklion between sun up and down? Seems at first a parade of poets, what with them being so numerous, a mix of tall and short and in between, all dressed in white and cream and ivory, daisy, eggshell, snow and frost, chiffon, porcelain and pearl, parchment, linen, bone and cream, all frou-froued up and past the nines. Their couture should have given me a clue. Guys and dolls in rosebuds, lace and taffeta, fussing and flaunting, all tittery and jittery. But me, I'm playing it old school frosty, slouching against the concrete seawall, waiting for whispered secret codes like Turkmenistan, Nagasaki or Rotorua. Name dropping so I know they know about namesakes, keepsakes and significance and whatnot. Finally, the one with the sapphire hair separates from the whole. We want to get married on Santorini, she tells me, pausing to draw breath. Marriage is, I know what marriage is. I cut her bridesplaining off because I know everything there is to know about brides and grooms, flower girls and mothers of, priests and celebrants, page boys and designer cakes, groomsmen, candle lighters and vratimi. The kinds of stupid folks did back in the days of connectivity to incite competitiveness and unnecessary complexity. Sailboat captains can do the ceremony, yeah? She looks so young, 14 or 15, born decades after the 88-minute war. Her stare is hard, Aegean blue and glassy, like folks reckon the ocean used to be. Sure thing, I shrug. Who's marrying whom? She grins. We're all marrying each other. Hands me a faded, crumpled shape that had clearly once been a proper postcard shiny. Young Sapphire Hair informs me that her name is Risenthella. The one beside her is Goldeneye. I don't ask names for all the others. Captain's all they're going to get from me. But they know all about my grandma's Santorini and my doggo Daisy Chain, who will be coming too. That part is non-negotiable. The wine-dark soup is what we call the watery smear between Heraklion and exclusion. It was once called something else, but weren't most things? I get why kids like Riz and Goldie feel so urged to push the barriers, seeing pastimes as elegant and romantic. Getting married was what everybody did back when, even folks who had never met before. My grandma told me all about it. She'd been married loads of times and outlived every one of those long-lost brides. That'll be enough for now.
Thank you, Kat. This is Kat reading from Dark Harvest, Hacking Santorini, and this is so hilarious because those names and they remind me so much of Second Life names. So everything comes back to Second Life. But this is a great example of this of the humor, but also again your blurbs. Now, what happens if people read the blurb? Are people allowed to read your inspirational blurbs, like where the story originated from before the story, or is that cheating? Or should we
I
cheat
think
ourselves out of something? What do you think?
the Newcon Press published the collection, and the lovely Ian Waits edited the story for me. And he said, putting the collection together, he said he prefers the blurbs to come after the story so they don't contaminate the story in some way or give you perceptions about what they're about to read. So, I think second is good. I actually like a good blurb to come second, like that. I prefer it that way myself.
I would agree. And because you throw such, the way you push these worlds out, it's just amazing. And then you just throw in there like the 88-minute war, and we go like, what? And oh my God, so many little things, and it's just such a invigorating the imagination. And then comes the blurb, and that's a little the cherry on the top, where you go like, wow, that's where that's where it comes from. So yeah, thank you, Kat. That's amazing. You may now sit down.
All right, I'm going to try that.
Yep. Principal Draxtor is now calling upon student Mr. Bradley up to the stage for a reading, if you will. Now, what do we hear from you? Let's see here.
I'm going to read. I'll distract you while I'm busy trying to walk myself over there. I am going to. I'm going to read from the. I thought I might read a short bit. Well, I think I'm going to read a short bit from inside the book, which is just a kind of. Yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah,
I'm not going to fly. I've fallen off the stage.
No, it just, you're doing good. You're doing great. And let me arrange it. And this is from Ghost Species. You want to set up the scene?
Yeah. Look, I'm just going to. Often when I've done readings, I've read from the prologue, but I thought I'd read from a section in the second half of the book. And this is Eve, the girl, has grown up now. She's about she's getting on for 20, and basically, kind of climate catastrophe is accelerating around them. And so it's just a little short section at the beginning of a section called Meltwater.
So this is behind. I just want to say this is after the chapter that is entitled "I Was a Teenage Neanderthal." This is the
Yes.
best chapter title ever.
I had that title quite early on in the piece, and I partly because I loved that kind of 50s, it's like a kind of 50s monster movie or a 50s teen movie, which I really loved. But one of the things that I wrote very early in the book was a bit where she, at the beginning of that section, where having discovered that she is a Neanderthal, which she didn't know, she does what you do, which is she goes away and Googles herself
Google.
and
Yeah.
starts trying to work out, who am I? What am I? By watching all of these kind of representations of, Frankenstein and, all of our kind of golems and cavemen and monsters that are created by science that you find in movies and books. So it's kind of odd sense of kind of, I guess, kind of researching herself and the cultural representations of herself, and the book's kind of playing around with that a bit. But yes, I was going to read a bit from the beginning of Meltwater, which is the section after that. So as I say, Eve's in her late teens at this point.
Mhm.
That year it feels as though winter will never arrive, the autumn lingering, unbroken, through May and June and into July. The plants and birds are thrown into confusion. In the branches, parrots and pardalotes cry plaintively into the darkness of the evenings instead of heading north to their winter homes. In the trees near their house, rosella chicks call urgently in their nest, a late brood that will surely die when the cold eventually arrives, as it must. Even the trees react unpredictably, the natives flowering spontaneously months out of season, the exotics either keeping their leaves or turning in the most half-hearted way, their confusion lending the wooded approaches to the city a curiously piebald look. In the mountains, fires smoulder, the smell of smoke and ash never far away. Nor is it just the birds and plants that are unsettled. Late May brings a run of days in the mid-30s, hot as summer, the blue water on the beaches dazzlingly clear in the weak winter light, the holiday mood made brittle by the shared sense that, delightful as the weather is, something is deeply awry. Eve feels it too, a sense of hastening, a dislocation deep in the fabric of things. And then, in mid-June, it changes. For a day it feels like a storm is approaching, low cloud hanging overhead, the warm wind shifting uncertainly. Late that evening, Eve walks along the path behind the house into the forest. In the darkness, the landscape seems fitful, anticipatory. Overhead, the leaves whispering, the limbs of the trees creaking like the timbers of a ship at sea. Perhaps the animals feel it as well, because the usual cries and hoots are absent. But where the path divides, she hears a rustling and, quick as thought, a fox steps onto the path in front of her. It is close, no more than 3 meters ahead, and at first it seems not to have seen her. But then it turns, and for a brief moment their eyes meet and she feels its awareness focus on her. She stands, frozen in place. Like her, it is a visitor here, an alien, but that does not mean she sees anything like recognition or affection in its gaze. Instead, she glimpses another mind, one absorbed in the business of its life, to which she is at best an irrelevance. Then it turns, its attention passing over her and away, and stepping back into its vulpine world, jogs away down the path and into the undergrowth. Kate is already in bed when she returns, the house silent. In her room, she opens the window above her bed and lies down, the scent of the night air filling the room as she waits for sleep. The change arrives sometime around 3, a brief silence preceding a sudden blast of wind, the sound of branches whipping, a gate banging in the distance. Perhaps responding to some shift in the air pressure, Eve wakes in the moments before it strikes, and for a few moments she lies listening to the wind, the passing of the warmth filling her with a curious sadness. And later, when she sleeps again, she dreams of the forest, the sleek shape of the fox moving through it, Yeah. So that's just a little bit.
Thank you so much, James Jean-Jacques Dupre, as you're known in Second Life. This is from Ghost Species. And what's also really interesting about your book is that when the I mean, when it really when the shit hits the fan, all this stuff is happening. The species are going extinct, but then, and I think that's brilliant. The power goes out, and that's when sort of society completely dissolves, like from one page to the next. It's really like everybody's talking about this spoiling frog thing, where the frog's like, hey, it's kind of warm in here, and then boom, he's dead. And that's kind of like, I guess, what you're trying what you very successfully did in the story. It's like everybody's like, yeah, it can't be that bad. Yeah, it's pretty bad, but we're still experimenting. There's still science, and then the refrigerator dies, and society dissolves
Yeah.
instantly.
I love the fact that in the book, the the end of civilization is signaled by the fridge going off.
Well, that is again. I mean, that's kind of a privilege thing, I guess, right?
Yeah,
For the
I think that's right.
privileged, for Nancy
Yeah.
Pelosi with her $30,000 refrigerator. Don't get me started on that interview where she was talking about how her fridge is stuffed with ice cream. So she's doing pretty well. Um, uh, Before I get completely off a tangent, we are out of time. We're going to continue a little bit the stream for a few minutes, and then until the bottom of the hour, we'll do fan audience Q&A here in World off stream. So one thing that is here on my run sheet, which I wanted to get to, is the the role of nonfiction. And James, you're writing a lot for various publications, as I said earlier, Australian publications and for the Guardian. And I pulled this. I'm putting it on the slide in the back of me here, an image from the brush fires in Australia. You guys were. This is really not a pun intended. Trailblazers before what's happening now on the west coast in North America, California, Oregon. But these images that we now see from San Francisco, you guys had that a year earlier, and you wrote this article. I believe the title is "Terror, Hope, Anger, and Kindness: The Complexity of Life as We Face the New Normal." Um, Really interesting article, as are the others in the essay. But what, when you go between fiction and nonfiction, I guess I asked this earlier a little bit, and Kat commented on it too. Is it better to is nonfiction a better platform, an article where you reach more people and activate them and create some urgency that results in action, or is fiction the place to do that?
Um.
And the
Oh, look,
reason, one more thing, because I have certain friends of mine who feel that the amount of fiction that I absorb is a waste of time, and I completely disagree, because I feel the the human condition and the depth of our humanity and our relationship to the planet, to the earth, and to other human beings, that is something that can be expressed best in stories.
yeah, I think that. I mean, I think that's right, and I think that kind of unease with the purpose of fiction is quite odd and quite recent. I think this kind of idea that somehow it's not you know that somehow there's something frivolous about reading stories. Although having
Right,
said that,
exactly. No,
uh,
that's exactly the thing that I find myself in conversations where people are like, well, how can you waste time reading, Heinrich Böll, for example, post-war German author, who was talking about basically, you know, the issue of authoritarianism and totalitarianism in a fictional context, but he describes, anyway, you know what I'm saying. It's like people go
uh,
like, how can you sit here while the world's burning, you're reading a book? Why don't you read the paper? I said, I
yeah,
can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I think that's the thing. I mean, and having said that, it's a new thing. It's not Plato was very suspicious of fiction, so it's quite an old
Ah,
suspicion actually. But yeah, I mean, I do think with that thing about whether you are writing fiction or non-fiction. I mean, fiction is slow. Fiction is it's a really different process. It's this kind of strange, kind of sedimentary kind of process where what you're doing is trying to bring something into the world. Nonfiction lets you reach a much bigger audience, which is the first thing. So one of the things that's great about writing for someone like The Guardian is that you get you get a really big audience. And in fact, the piece you pulled out, when I was asked to do it, they said, look, you've got to understand that we're getting huge kind of readership on these stories. And I was like, oh, well, sure. And then the thing came out, and I had this kind of like, I'd actually gone away that day, and we were driving down. I had my phone off for about 5 hours, and when I turned it back on, because I'd been driving, I had, kind of 7,000 notifications on Twitter, and it was just this completely overwhelming kind of thing about people responding to this piece. And that it's wonderful at one level, but at another level, it was just really interesting to me because nonfiction allows you to kind of, you can write it faster, you can deliver it faster, you can kind of do different kinds of work with it. You can try and get people to think things, you can argue them places, you can do all of that stuff. And fiction will do some of that stuff as well, but it does it differently, and it does it much more slowly. And so I think there is a real advantage to writing that kind of nonfiction. It lets you kind of intervene in a way that's hard to do in a novel.
Mm. Kat, how do you feel about that? The different role, the similarities of the role, and also us or me. I'm talking always about me as a consumer. What would you advise me to do? I mean, am I escaping here into your books, and should I read more Guardian? I mean, my wife thankfully emails me those articles, so then I'm also informed in a way.
Look, I love The Guardian. I love nonfiction. I love fiction, but we need to actually be getting out there and protesting. I think we need to be pushing back. We need to be complaining to our governments because they do not represent us. Things are happening in real time now that are just going to make everything else harder. I mean, our Prime Minister in Australia has just announced $50 million in bailouts for gas companies. He's looking for the gas-led recovery, pushing for new pipelines and new power plants and all of that stuff. This is not helpful. This is not going to make anything any better. September 25th is the School Strike Global Day of Action. I urge everyone to get out there and support the kids. Tweet if you don't want to get out on the streets waving a banner. Look, I joined Extinction Rebellion and I spend a lot of time doing actions with them now because I write as much as ever but writing's not enough. We need to make a lot of noise because the bunker people will win otherwise. I really believe this.
Yep. Yep. And I just wanted to say, as a German national with American residency, I also want to not to make people more depressed, but oftentimes my American friend says, "Oh, you in Germany, you guys are so evolved, and your government is responsive, and you're governed by sane people." And I understand that with Trump, that the bar is fairly low, but the but my government, or our government here in Germany, is also beholden to these interests, to coal, to the car industry, the essential workers of the car industry. We can't risk that. We got to pump out cars and streets and such. And it's really, really frustrating that at the high uh, level here, there is very, very little action. So, Kat, I can also just I applaud you for mentioning going out on the street, and I understand that people may have reservations with COVID. If you can go out, if not, just write letters, make calls,
Yep.
and get active. Absolutely.
Yep.
Here in the back is an image, also still from the Malakota fire. Here, this is an 11-year-old girl in the dinghy trying to escape it. And the last image that I'm putting up here, and then we'll sign off and do a little bit SL only Q&A for the last 15 minutes of the program. Here is an image that I found, an editorial cartoon by Graham McKay. Also something to think about. Here are the waves that are uh, threatening us. COVID-19. After that, a bigger wave with recession on it, and after that, an even bigger wave with climate change on it. And on the very left side, that city that is depicted here has a speech bubble above it says, "Be sure to wash your hands, and all will be well." So I don't want to make people more anxious than they already are, but I think it's important not to fall prey to easy optimism. It's hard work, and people who can do it, they should, and also be kind to people who may not have the strength to do it. Bring them along, but be kind to them and don't blame them. Well, Cat Sparks, James, Bradley, thank you so much for coming. Any last words before we go off the air into our exclusive VIP after party?
No, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us on the show.
That is always nice to hear. Thank you guys so much for coming. Next week we have Will Wiles, who has his current book is called Plume, and he will appear as a cockatoo. So that's all I have to say. That's next week at the normal time at the 12 o'clock hour, 12 p.m. Second Life time. In closing, thanks to my team. Well, thanks to Kat and James, first of all, but also my team, Isabel Sharon, running a wonderful camera, producing Strawberry Singh, who will come back very, very soon. We miss you very much, Strawberry. We love Isabel. Maybe we can keep you both. Who knows? Let's see. Talk to my human resources officer. Brett from Linden Lab, Patch, Linden, all the moles, Sika Ghost, who provides some of the backdrop here, Silas Merlin, also in the audience today, making wonderful avatars, Kralas, customizing avatars, Marianne McCann, who customized this venue. We have other places here on the island. Come back to the island anytime. It's open 24/7. The reading list from bookshop.org. You can find it by clicking on the books here, and I'll put up the reading list for the day in just about half an hour or so. So, see you all next week right here at the Second Life Book Club.